Thank you for attending today's webinar on supply management contract writing. This is webinar one of a four-part series that we do one part every quarter, and we'll be covering the entire body of knowledge relative to supply management contract writing. So, we're going to go into do some house cleaning, and we're going to cover some of what we're going to touch on today. We're pressed for time. We have about 12 minutes, so we're going to get right into it. We're going to get into initially the purposes of contracts. And contracts have 6 distinct purposes. One is to formalize obligations. Just bear with me a minute. And rights, the rights of each party, the buyer and the seller. 2, to control and allocate risk. 3, to lock in the benefits that will be derived from a contractual relationship between the buying party and the selling party. 4, to eliminate the need for negotiation. 5, to agree on how exceptions will be handled. And 6, for any other advantage that the parties see fit. We're going to get straight into the type of agreements. So the first type of agreements is what we call a goods contract. And these are perhaps the most simple of the different types of contracts. And as it's usually governed by the framework of the Uniform Commercial Code. So it's I would say very much cut in stone how the contractual obligation between both parties would be governed, and how, if any remedies would have to be assessed and deployed, how those remedies would look. And then we have the service contract, which is, I would say, a lot more complex and complicated than goods contracts, as they're a lot more involved and they require a greater degree of care, because there could be many gray areas with service contracts, and they usually pose a greater degree of risk. They're also time-bound parameters or time-bound deliverables on service contracts. So let's say you hire a consultant to deliver a service to improve your particular process in an organization, and a contract is written that certain items or certain milestones would be realized over a period of time. It's way more complex and fuzzy, I would say, than the delivery or the receipt of a contract that would govern raw materials or goods, because those are, pretty much cut in stone, especially if the goods conform to the required specifications. Then the next type of contracts that occur in supply chains would be the combination of goods and services, where, for example, a procurement professional would procure a machine if you're in a bakery environment, you would buy, let's say, an oven, and that oven would come with this service agreement or type of warranty, or it could come with the service of the setup of the oven and the service of that oven over time. So you would have parameters that would govern the actual oven itself, which would be the good, and then the parameters that will govern the service that would come as a result of in support of the duration of that, the lifespan of that orbit. So this is what you call a combination contract. And these would cover both components. Then another type of agreement or contract would be a confidentiality or a non-disclosure agreement. I'm sure many of you have been asked to sign a non-disclosure when you have been employed by an organization, or if you're providing a service as, let's say, a consultant for an organization, you would have to sign, and it's a best practice to sign, have a non-disclosure agreement signed that you would not divulge certain proprietary information relative to that organization. And then we have the letter of intent, which is more a one-sided type of agreement in which one party agrees to perform certain service for the other party. Then we go on to the next slide, and we would discuss briefly the structure of contracts. So the first page of a well-written contract would be the cover page. Then page 2 would be the table of contents. Then the next section will be the preamble, which introduces the parties that are involved in a contractual agreement. Then the next section of contract would be the overall body. And then you would have a section that would be provided for signatures of the buying organization and the selling organization. And then the next section will be the exhibit section, which would be used to provide information or supporting information relative to the information contained in the body of the contract. And one of the things that is very important to understand in terms of the role and the mandate of the procurement function, there are 3 distinct areas of that mandate. One is to control spend. The second is to support operations. The third mandate of the procurement function and procurement professionals is to protect your organization from risk. So protect the organization from risk, support of the organization and the conversion and the production processes, especially in particular, and to manage spend. Contracts are a very, very good way to protect the organizations from risk. The better and more meticulously we draft our contracts, the better we'll be able to control the total cost of ownership, especially if you have a situation where your suppliers are not performing to agreement. It's very important that we're able to protect our organizations from risk. And one critical area of contracts, and God forbid you're in a situation where you have a non-conforming or non-performing supplier, it's very important that we draft in the contracts. We have a very, very robust list of remedies, and the suppliers clearly, and both parties clearly understand the nature of those remedies and how they would be executed throughout the relationship. And there are various types of remedies. If you're in a situation where you have a supplier that is not performing to standard or not performing to the agreed specifications of that contract, One would be termination. Termination could be very disruptive to your supply chain process. So I would advise you to select your suppliers with very, very, very special case. You don't have to get into a situation where you have to terminate, but termination is an option. Because you could be terminating a supplier that is very critical to your process, and this could be very, very disruptive. So the rule of thumb is that if you have a very, very robust supplier selection process, and you have a very robust contract, and the suppliers, there's this total understanding between yourselves and your suppliers as to what the consequences of non-performance. Those consequences, then you'll be doing a really good job for your organizations. So termination, and hopefully you never reach that point. Another remedy for non-conformance would be to withhold payment. And all of these remedies could be disruptive. So avoidance is the rule of thumb. Okay. Then you have cover damages, which the seller would have to compensate the buyer for certain parts of that agreement in which they're non-compliant. So if there's a situation, for example, a supplier is supposed to deliver a certain quality level of goods at a specific agreed upon time, at a specific agreed upon date, at a specific price point, and they fail in one or all of those parameters, just picture getting the wrong product or receiving a delivery that is late, and they don't provide the quantities that you requested. Just picture the cost in terms of to the manufacturing or the conversion processes. You would have I've seen situations where you would have employees waiting for materials, and the materials, number one, the cost of that of waiting for materials. Then worse than that is they have to wait for the materials, and then they're short. Delivery comes in short. So now they can't meet the production requirements. So just think about for a moment of how that would have impacted the total cost of ownership. So be very careful how you select your suppliers, and there are many other parameters to determine whether a supplier is good or not outside of price. I've seen buyers focus on the price, and they choose a supplier with the lowest price point as opposed to a supplier that has a slightly higher price point but could deliver the right quantities at the right time, never deviates in terms of the quality level of those raw materials or inputs. That supplier that came in at a slightly higher price point in the bigger scheme of things could actually be a cheaper supplier to do business with. So it's looking at the cost of doing business with a supplier. And the key metric one of the key metrics for procurement professionals and a procurement function in terms of understanding how well they're executing their mandate is the total cost of ownership. So if you have a price point of, let's say, 90 cents, and another supplier has a price point of let's say, 95 cents for a product, and the supplier that came in at 92, if they're selected, they have, let's say, a 10% defect rate. They have a higher likelihood of being late. You should be able to calculate and keep a register of the cost of doing business with that supplier. So to prevent going through these remedies, again, and I can't I always focus on this, is to make sure that you have a very robust supplier selection process. Rule of thumb. I'm going to go in quickly to some Q&A. Do we have any questions on what we've covered so far? I'll just wait a minute to see if you have any questions. Okay, no one has questions. One very good tool to prevent a situation where you have to deploy remedies to remedy supplier poor performance or non-conformance to the agreement, the contractual agreements. One good, great tool for that purpose is the FMEA, failure mode and effect analysis, where you would analyze you would record the number of occurrences that you would have had with a supplier being non-conforming to the contractual agreement. You would also document and keep score of the impact of that non-conformance. And then you would also understand and make sure you have a very good understanding of your ability to detect at any time if that particular supplier, I guess based on historical patterns and information and data, the likelihood that that supplier would actually be in a situation under certain circumstances out of contractual compliance. So a rule of thumb is to scorecard each one of those parameters. Again, the occurrence, the amount of occurrences you've had on a scale of 1 to 10, the likelihood. So if you score 9, that's very, very, very bad. If there's 0 or you have 0 occurrences, then would be the score on that particular supply would be 0. And then on a scale of 1 to 10, you would score and assess the severity and the impact of a particular disruption to the supply chain and your customers and your organization, the fiscal impact of the particular supply being conformance on a to 10. So if 10, that means the impact is severe on the customers and it's severe on the organization. And then, do you have robust mechanisms that could detect if, for example, under certain circumstances or certain conditions, a supplier may fall out of compliance on a scale of 1 to 10. So if it's very important that we understand these 3 parameters: severity, the degree of impact, and your capability to determine or to detect. So this way you could take preemptive action and contingency, deploy the necessary contingency plans to mitigate those risks. So for example, if you have a high level of occurrence, let's say at 8 out of 10, then, and you have the severity is 10 if you have failures, and your ability to detect if a supply is going to slip out of or fall into the parameter of non-conformance or poor performance is 10. That means you don't have that capability. So 10 times 8, you have a score of 800, which is the risk priority number. We call it RPN for short. If you have a risk priority number of 800, that means that the particular agreement or the particular synergy you have with a particular supplier is high risk. That's a high risk supplier. And immediate action has to be taken to either replace those that a supplier who has a risk who poses a risk of 800 to an organization. You need to change suppliers. And then if you have a supplier that has a zero risk or very low, maybe 50 or 80 or 100, you find ways to continuously improve the process, so you reduce the risk factor, the risk that that particular supplier who scores, let's say, 80 or 100 poses to your organization. So it's a very, very good tool. So I have, in the past, I've done, there was a period in the organization where I had 20 suppliers, and I allocated and assigned risk priority numbers to all of the suppliers. And I had some when I came into a particular organization. I had a couple, I had one that was 800, I had a couple 500s, I had a couple 300s, and I had many that were under 100. And the ones that pose a high degree of risk, I told them that, hey, we need to deploy immediate contingencies. And I gave them a period in which they had to improve their process. So we had immediate contingencies which helped to in the short term, mitigate a lot of the risk, historical risk that those suppliers pose to my organization. And I worked with them, and their process improvement folks, to improve their situation. Some of them, a couple of my suppliers just could not improve for different reasons, and I replaced them. So I ended up with a situation where my average RPN was under 100, which is pretty good, and in the bakery environment. So again, failure mode and effect analysis, a very, very powerful tool to use in addition to a robust culture of contracts and contract writing. The failure mode and effect analysis tool is a very, very, very powerful methodology that you could use to enable and realize the third mandate of protecting the organization from risk. And I'm going to stop now. Any questions? All right, we at about 23 minutes. Now just hold on. If you have any questions, you could type them in. Chris, you have any questions? If anybody else has any questions, you could type it into the chat section, and I'll gladly respond. If anyone needs a tool, the tool for failure mode and effect analysis, just let me know, and I'll email it to you. And if anyone needs any coaching on how to deploy the failure mode and effect analysis methodology in support of your contract writing process, I'll be more than happy to provide that degree of coaching. So this concludes the webinar for today, Supply Management Contract Writing. And I hope that you enjoyed it. And the next webinar would be in 3 months. where we'll do part 2 of supply management contract writing. This is David Millington, Director of Education at Next Level Purchasing. Have a good day, and thank you very much for attending.